I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Tuesday, December the 11th, where everybody's talking about a record harvest. I'm not talking about corn and beans, which by the time we get it all counted up, that might be a record too, but I'm talking about your federally inspected slaughter for last week, and you're supposed to say harvest now because it doesn't make people weak in the knees that aren't accustomed to killing cattle and eating them like the rest of us are, but that's what they're for. But anyway, Record Harvest had a huge kill last week. 667,000. Wow, that was a big one. And with the bigger weights that we're using now, the beef production was the largest we've seen in 15 years since back in 2003, which was BSE outbreak time back then, but just huge slaughter, and that was great. And what can we pin that on? Greed. Greed from the packers. Normally they're very disciplined. They know they're going to get all the fat cattle anyway, so they don't get too excited about things, but when the timing's right, they'll show greed as much as anybody, and that's great. That's what we need. None of your economic models work without greed. If folks aren't in it to make as much money as they can and continue producing something or buying something until it doesn't pay off anymore, then nothing works. So that's great that they showed that, and it makes things kind of work together, and it's probably going to help us finish out this year and start off next year on at least the right foot. Let's look at the board for Monday. December live cattle futures down 32 cents despite all that good news, but the board does not respond positively to good news anymore. Still talking about it being overbought. But December was down 32 cents at 117.57. We do have a return of the basis, which a lot of guys are liking. It's not really enough to help them reach break evens if they're upside down on some cattle, but every little bit helps. February fat cattle futures down 32 cents at 121.20. Now feeder cattle pretty responsive there. They were up. January feeder cattle up 65 cents to end the day at 145.02. March up 87 cents at 142.75. The weighted average on last week's negotiated fed cattle trade in the 5-area feeding region was 106,000. So pretty good there, especially leading into the holidays. But on a higher market there, you look at the trade all through last week, it was from 116 all the way up to 119 on live sales, ending the week fully at 119 on especially in the southern plains and basically anywhere but Iowa and parts of Nebraska. We're only getting 118, those that still have a little bit of a market ready supply problem. But you look at the weighted average on all your live steers in the 5-area feeding region, 118.11. That was up $1.01. Evidently we're not having that much of a problem with the heavies anymore, because your live steer weighted average was behind that quite a ways at 117.84, and you remember when they were penalizing those big steers so much, your live steer weighted average would come in quite a bit below your heifers, but we may have kind of got behind most of that. Your dressed steer weighted average, remember those were bringing from 183 to 185 in your early sales in the northern plains, and then finally it took 187 to swing the gates and get the rest of them to come. That was $2 to $4 higher on a dressed basis. On your weighted average on steers, 185.99, pretty good. That was up $2.61 compared to the previous week's weighted average. That's quite a bit on the average there. And that goes to show you that up in the northern plains, Nebraska, parts of Iowa, that's where they trade most of your dressed cattle, and your dressed heifers did average more than your dressed steers. They averaged 186.19. So still a few heavy cattle there getting penalized, and you just don't get the heifers that big. Nationwide, your negotiated cash fat cattle sales are 135,900 head. There was a lot around the fringes there, which it was more of a difference between your 5 area than normal. and 30% of those, which is quite a few, 41,400 head, sold for the 15 to 30 day delivery, and you would expect that to get help those packers get through the holidays there, because they're going to try to stay open as much as they can. But with the holidays falling early in the week like that, it's going to be pretty tough for them not to be closed for 3 days there on a long weekend, because those people, they like to enjoy their family and have a good time during the holidays too. They don't just have to work all the time. But let's look at your feeder cattle market. Lighter receipts around on Monday, a lot lighter. We had a huge offering of feeder cattle last week. In some states, it was the biggest they'd had in years, and everything just kind of culminated with the weather the way it was, but it wrecked the feeder cattle market, especially your big feeder calves. It was tough on things, and just with the sloppy conditions in your northern feedlot areas, and just heavy receipts everywhere, and a lot of those heavier balling calves. A lot of them are still unweaned, coming in pretty heavy, and there's nothing you can do with them but go to feedlot with them, and just it just killed the demand for things. But your real-time index on Cattle Market Central there, late Monday, was at 140.75, down just 23 cents from the end of last week, so it didn't lose too much more ground. Oklahoma National Stockyards in Oklahoma City, a real light run there, just 4,000 head, because you remember at the end of last week I talked to you about how all these weathermen had everybody scared to death. It was going to be Snowmageddon and just bury everything, which maybe they didn't say that, but they did think that a lot of areas would get 10 inches of snow down here in the southern plains, Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, moving across. Thought the ice would be a big deal, and pretty much all of that went south. Lubbock got a pretty good skiff of snow and some areas down there, but up where the major part of your feedlots are in Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, just hardly even anything. But that did spook people, and they didn't make plans to get their cattle put together and get them sent in. You pretty much got to have them in there Sunday in Oklahoma City for them to be able to get them to sort it up and ready for the big Monday sale. But it really curbed the sheets there in Oklahoma City, and 4,000 head. Your middleweight cattle, your feeding calves and your short yearling cattle, weighing from 5.5 to 700 pounds, were $2 to $5 higher than the sharp declines that we'd seen. Others $1 to $3 lower where tested. But Joplin Regional Stockyards, 4,900 head there, steady to $3 lower for the most part, except for your Pee-wee steer calves, and they seem to always sell well, but they were steady to an additional $5 higher there in Joplin, and it's hard to believe that they had nearly 5,000 head on Monday after selling 19,300 head there at Joplin last week. But they moved the cattle through there, guys, a lot of them. Probably your best test of your market on Monday was Russell Livestock in Russell, Iowa. You look at this market report on Cattle Market Central from them, and had a good test of the market on several different weight groups. Judging from the Cattle Market Central market report, which is the only one that I found available, your steer calves weighing under 7 were mostly steady, which that's good. Heifer calves under 600 pounds were quite a bit higher in spots there, and then your bigger feeding cattle, the few that they did have, because your calves were the most well tested, your bigger cattle were off just a little bit. But look at some of those quotes on that Russell Livestock Market Report on Cattle Market Central. On the 5-weight steers, there were 745 head of them. They averaged 557 pounds at 154.62. That was up about $0.50 with the previous week's weighted average. On 5-weight heifers, 532 head of them, averaged 551 at 135.96. That was up just over $7 from last week. And remember, they got bit just as hard as anybody did last week, but good customers trust in that market. They know it's as good a market anywhere, but when the market's lower, but brought them another good run of around 4,000 head on Monday this week. Your bigger steers weighing in the 6s, 718 head of them, averaged 645 at 143.95. That was off about a half a dollar. So like I said, steady on those feeder calves under 700 pounds there in Russell, Iowa. Individual quote out of Russell was the highest that I saw. 61 head of 855 pound steers in Russell, Iowa bring 149.75. That's your feeder flash for Tuesday.